Joining us now by phone is Courtney Kube. He's NBC News correspondent for national security and the military. Courtney, thanks very much for making time to talk to us on this strangest of all days.
Thanks, Rachel.
So I'm talking about this in stark terms because I think this isn't a marginal development. This seems like something worth taking seriously. But I have to ask you if we have any clarity yet on the basic question of whether the president is actually invoking the Insurrection Act so he can deploy the active duty military on U.S. soil outside of D.C.
So, Rachel, all day long, my colleague Carol Lee and I have been tracking that the president has been warming to the idea of actually using the Insurrection Act around the country. It doesn't seem that he's invoked it yet, but what I took his Rose Garden statement to be is him threatening the governors to say, look, if you guys don't start bringing in more National Guard troops and put a stop to these protests, then I will invoke the Insurrection Act. The confusing part is what's going on in Washington, D.C. tonight. As you mentioned, because it's a different than the states, there wouldn't have to be a governor who would request these forces. It's not clear whether he actually had invoked it for D.C. What we believe is happening at this point is that if he's bringing in any active duty troops into the District of Columbia, they aren't performing classic law enforcement missions, so they wouldn't actually be violating the Posse Comitatus Act. So both of these statutes are very confusing. The Posse Comitatus Act, as you said, it prohibits any active duty troops from performing any law enforcement mission anywhere inside the continental U.S. But if he were to invoke the Insurrection Act, then that would essentially go to the wayside, and he could use active duty troops for law enforcement. Just to complicate it even further, there are some basic response to protest kind of things that the troops could do if without violating Posse Comitatus, and that is things like crowd control. They can actually still help the local law enforcement in some cases in these protests without violating Posse Comitatus if the president doesn't invoke insurrection. So it's really murky. And when he came out to the Rose Garden, we thought we were going to get a declaration of what he was doing, but instead we got a lot of very vague language about thousands of troops and law enforcement that were being deployed around the country.
Because this is such a serious thing for us as a country, because it's such a serious prospect in terms of our republic, us not having clarity on it is unsettling, especially after the president made public remarks about it that were, as you note, supposed to be clarifying. I am even more unsettled by the fact that it seems that the Pentagon doesn't have clarity about this, that the Pentagon appears to not know what authority the president is planning to invoke, actively invoking right now, or intending to invoke at some point in the future after some threshold is crossed that we're not sure what it is? I mean, is it fair that the civilian leadership of the military doesn't know what's going on here?
The only way I can explain is it seems there is a very small group of people at the top who know what's going on, and it's just not trickling down. I mean, there were people over the weekend who were vehemently denying the idea that the Insurrection Act was even on the table 48 hours ago. And now, we're all expecting the president to invoke it in the next hours or day. So part of it is the situation is evolving so rapidly. I think the protests in D.C. really were a game changer for the White House and for Pentagon officials who I spoke with. Seeing monuments defaced and the St. John's Church, this historic church across from the White House, being burned and graffiti on its walls, that changed the calculus a bit, and the officials who we spoke with, Carol Lee and I spoke with today, said that was something that really changed the president's thinking on this, and it pushed this to the next level of response. But the question remains, what is there an active duty component? We know there's several groups of military police around the country who actually stand all the time on a 24-hour watch, and they're waiting to be called up, and they have to respond within 24 hours to civil issues. It's called defense support to civil authorities. Several of those units, military police units, were put on 4-hour deployment orders. So one of those could easily be notified, and one of them's down in Fort Bragg. That's the one that we're told would be the most likely to respond here to D.C. They could be up here in a matter of hours to help if needed. So it's such a rapidly evolving situation, specifically here in D.C. We just don't have a lot of clarity on what's going on.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.